Welcome to I Know You Didn't Ask. I'm your host, Megan O'Donnell, and I am very happy to be here today to discuss the Real Housewives of Potomac stars, Dr. Wendy and Eddie Osefo, and their alleged insurance fraud scandal that broke late last week. There is so much to unpack here, and don't worry, we're going to go through all of it. Who the hell the two of them are, where they're from, how they got together, a bit of their family values and backgrounds, which we'll find out is a huge part of this entire story. We'll talk about the crimes. About all the incriminating shit that went down because there's a lot of it. Of course, we'll touch on the mugshots, have some choice words about those. And then, of course, we'll talk kind of about what the fallout is for a situation like this because there is a lot of fallout. And we'll talk about all of the kind of different ways that this couple will be affected by their choices to scam various insurance companies. So there's so much to unpack. I also need to quickly just soft launch my YouTube. If you go onto YouTube/ I Know You Didn't Ask Pod, you'll be able to watch all episodes on YouTube. I actually realized a way that I can really easily edit the video and audio content at the same time. So it actually just makes sense to not leave this video footage on the cutting room floor. And I am wearing a green and white outfit in honor of the Nigerian flag because there is so much information about Nigerian culture that we will be learning today. You can probably see that I am not Nigerian, so what the fuck do I know about Nigerian culture? But I did listen to 47% of Wendy's audiobook on 1.8 speed. So that 40 whatever percent really did teach me a lot about Nigerian culture, and we will be getting into all of that and more on this here episode. So let's just get right into the story. I mean, I think to just level set quickly, this entire situation obviously kind of came out of left field. Eddie and Wendy were highly respected people in their community in the Maryland/ Potomac area, and we'll get into all of their accolades and whatnot. But the story is certainly rooted in greed. And it very much highlights this desire to have more than you need, to keep up with the Joneses, to portray this certain lifestyle that is aspirational. The problem is portraying that lifestyle when you don't have the money and you're frauding various insurance companies to get the money to then continue portraying this outward appearance of, a lavish, highfalutin lifestyle. That's where the problems start. And so that's exactly where we're going to kind of start our little journey today. And money in our society is such an omnipresent reality. Everything is very expensive. Even the most basic of things, toilet paper at the grocery store is expensive. So assume, when you're talking about people like Wendy and Eddie who are driving high-end cars, living in a high-end neighborhood, buying gorgeous trips and designer clothes for their beautiful three children. All of those things cost a lot of money. And once you start looking at your overhead at a certain point, you're thinking, fuck, we've overextended. And my mom's always talked about this phrase called financial serenity, which just means being comfortable and confident in where you are financially, where you're not in any debt. You don't have massive amounts of credit card debt. Hopefully you don't have student loan debt, all of these different things. And you can just kind of live within your means and live a frugal lifestyle where you travel, where you go out to dinner, of course, but within reason. And, you have to be able to understand and know at a certain point in your life, you know what, maybe I don't need that Louis Vuitton bag. Yes, I have $3,000 in my account that I could use for it, but I'm not going to go and buy it. And that was just me giving myself a pep talk. I'm deeply materialistic. That's a whole other issue, but we will find that greed and this keeping up with the Joneses element is very much the crux of Wendy and Eddie's current situation that they're in. Of course, this is all alleged, so don't fucking come and sue me, but it honestly could be a good press for the show if I did get sued. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see where I land after this episode. Yikes. So we all watch Bravo. We all know that so many various housewives have found themselves in the clink, getting locked up, arrested, this and that. We've also seen robberies, which we'll get into that as a portion of this entire story as well. But I think what people confuse in terms of Bravo's fandom and standum, if you will, watching Karen or Luann, drink and drive, have a DUI, whatever, make really poor choices, that those poor choices that they made that ended up in a harrowing mugshot were not with the intention to be fraudulent and to scam. When you're drunk driving, and Luann's situation, like getting drunk and like being in the wrong hotel room with a guy, whatever the fuck happened in that situation, those were more harmful to themselves and like personal rock bottom moments. Whereas I think Wendy's situation, as well as Jen Shah as an example, were premeditated. They hurt various people. They take advantage of the system. And they're crimes that are predicated on the assumption that the perpetrator, Wendy or Jen in this situation, is just so much smarter than the average person who wouldn't know that they were being scammed. And so that premeditation and the sloppiness that we'll find that Eddie and Wendy had throughout their entire little scam that they were pulling is really their downfall. And, that presumption that I'm smarter than you, oh, I could scam you, didn't really work out for either of them. And so that's, I kind of think, why fans are also viewing this as a very different situation from, the Grand Dame, who, like, the first episode of this latest season of Potomac, the first moments of the show are talking about her arrest and, kind of teeing up the fact that we're going to see more of her story on this current season. Whereas I don't know if I could say the same for Wendy and Potomac. We do glamorize felons in this world, which is bizarre. But again, Luann and Karen Huger, as our examples, were not as malicious as a Jen Shah character or Wendy. And Andy Cohen has made it very clear that he never wants Jen Shah around him or on a future season of Salt Lake City. So we'll see what he thinks and what production thinks about Wendy's place as a Real Housewife of Potomac. Okay, so before we get too deep, let's talk a little bit about who Wendy is, who Eddie is, and what is this life that they've created together in Potomac. And let's be real, the two of them don't even live in Potomac. Actually, none of the current housewives of Potomac live in Potomac. But that's besides the point. Same goes with Beverly Hills, so I'm not gonna nitpick there. So Wendy and Eddie slithered onto our screens in season 5 of Real Housewives of Potomac, and the 5th season of the show premiered August 2nd, 2020. And that was Wendy's big debut onto, broadcast television. And Wendy's a Nigerian-American political commentator. She's a public affairs academic and a TV personality, of course. We know her as Zen Wen, and honestly, I took a yoga class this morning, so I'm actually Zen Meg. And God knows Wendy is not being Zen wherever she is right now. There's no Zen energy around her. So Wendy moved to America at 3 years old. She grew up with a single mom. Her dad was always in and out of her life throughout her childhood. She grew up in North Carolina, then moved up to Massachusetts. She had summers in New York where she really fell in love with New York and always said, I have the personality of a New Yorker, but the manners and behaviors of a Southern belle. But she very much grew up in the Nigerian American culture, and again, listen to 47% of her audiobook, and the entire thing is about her Nigerian upbringing and all of the stressors and pressure put on Nigerian children to be incredibly successful, to be incredibly wealthy, to be well dressed, to have fancy cars, and to have all of the best things in life. And her book is called Tears of My Mother: The Legacy of My Nigerian Upbringing, and we will get into her mother and their relationship later in this episode, but it's so interesting to listen to her audiobook and then, kind of see and dig through some of the issues that her and Eddie are currently facing, and to see how it's, exactly the opposite of what her life leading up to this point has been working towards, working towards getting these degrees, having an honest living, being successful for you and your family. And these insurance fraud claims really have put a massive damper in all of the work that you have done your whole entire life to be this quote unquote perfect Nigerian child. And we'll get into my armchair psychology diagnosis of the situation later in the episode. Don't worry. I will say, listening to the audiobook, Wendy does say daughters just like Teresa Giudice. And when I was Googling and finding things out about her, I actually found out that she went to Rutgers for one of her master's degrees. So I'm guessing like the Jersey daughters imparted onto her, because I couldn't stop hearing it. And once, again, I was listening at 1.8 speed, so everything sounds a little bit wonky. So really, at the end of the day, she's just guilty of sounding like Teresa Giudice, which, I mean, let's quickly just go back. Teresa Giudice wasn't as smart as Wendy. So as a viewer, I always kind of believed that Teresa just like didn't know her husband was like making fake documents for her. Like, I don't think Teresa and Joe were like up late at night, like forging a W-2. Like, I don't think Teresa even knew what the fuck a W-2 was, to be quite honest with you. Whereas Wendy, I kind of feel like she knew what the fuck was going on. And we will get to all the incriminating information that basically proves that she didn't know what the fuck was going on. So one of Wendy's main things on the show is that she has 4 degrees, which is a massive triumph for a Nigerian American girl. For the Nigerian American community, again, one that I'm representing in a white and green sweater right now, is incredibly focused on education. Being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an engineer, and then subsequently marrying one, subsequently having children who fall into that world of, academic pressure. Thank God I didn't have academic pressure. My mom's like, oh, just don't try not to get a C. That was like all I really needed to do. And then in college, nobody even checked my grades. My mom was like, as long as you graduate, we're Gucci. Like, I don't need to be involved. You just make sure you graduate. I said, done and doneer. So, as we mentioned, Wendy is 4 degrees, 4 degrees, 4 degrees. That was like her whole first season. She's like, speak to me like I have 4 degrees. It's like, shut up. No one cares. She's a bachelor's in science and poli-sci, a master's of arts in government, master of science in public affairs, and a PhD in public affairs and community development, going to both Rutgers, Johns Hopkins, and Temple University. All really impressive universities. So the TLDR on Wendy is that she's a smart Nigerian American. So as I mentioned, Nigerian Americans are incredibly focused on being educated. To be quite honest, it seems like in her book, like she said, like growing up, her mother would basically say, like, don't be like those gross Americans, which, like, same, like Americans can be really gross. And so she was continuing on about all of the statistics regarding Nigerian Americans being the most educated immigrant group. And one of the interesting facts that I learned about Nigerians in America are that the median Nigerian income is 11% higher than the median income of Americans in general. So it really does show you how successful and driven Nigerian Americans are. And Wendy and Eddie are truly examples of that. But as we all know, greed is a deadly sin, honey. And unfortunately, it can lead you to some questionable behavior, regardless of, where you are in, the academic world. And the pressure that Wendy has felt her entire life seemingly started the moment she had memories. And it's interesting because we see Wendy and Eddie treat their children very much the same way. They have incentivized the children to get master's degrees, and each subsequent master's degree that they get, they actually get more money in their will when Wendy and Eddie pass away, which is rich considering like what's in this will. Like, we'll get to the substantial debt that they're supposedly in. We will get there. So Wendy is married to Eddie. Eddie is honestly, TBH, kind of fun and cute. I was always really into him. And he is, again, incredibly accomplished and educated. He also has 4 degrees, bachelor in science, master's, and a law degree. So again, booked and busy, Rutgers, University of Maryland, Georgetown University, the works. So he has been in and out of accounting firms for a while now. I went onto his LinkedIn and he was working at an accounting firm since February 2019. But it's interesting because we all know Eddie in the last few seasons is opening and starting his own legal marijuana business back in 2022 called Happy Eddie. And nowhere on his LinkedIn has any mention of Happy Eddie, which I just thought was interesting. But it's a very successful, booming marijuana distributor. And love your work, Eddie. I love Love the stuff. So Wendy and Eddie were very much kind of a power couple on this cast. As we know, the ladies of Potomac don't always have the most stable and or sound or loving relationships. So in comparison to Juan and Robin, Ray and Karen, Ashley and fucking Michael, the two of them seemed very much like a happy power couple. And they even kind of had moments on the show where Wendy was saying, like, oh, my life is a mood board for these ladies. They're jealous of me. They love my lifestyle, my degrees, my fabulous family, our beautiful children, all of the good things that they had in life. And last season of Potomac, Wendy and Eddie, and I mean, Karen Huger too, interesting coincidence, all went to the White House to record a episode of her YouTube show with the press secretary. But throughout all of this education that we're going to be talking about, there are 8 degrees between the two of them. And we live in America. Surprise! And education is incredibly expensive. So when a couple who is, in their early 40s are talking about the 8 degrees of higher education that the both of them have received, that's going to cost a lot of money. And I ended up taking all of their degrees and putting it into ChatGPT and saying, hey, can you calculate the average cost for these degrees throughout the 2010s and whatever, early 2020s, whatever. And they came back and said the approximate cost for all of those 8 degrees was approximately $900,000. So we can't look at those degrees without thinking about the subsequent student loan debt that might have been plaguing them. Most Americans, unfortunately, do have student loan debt, but also most Americans aren't seeking out multiple graduate degrees that also might hinder their ability to actually be working at the time, making money to pay back those degrees. So that's something I wanted to kind of lob into the conversation while we get deeper into what the fuck actually happened here. So as a couple, Eddie and Wendy met as teenagers. They were friends for years before things turned romantique. After college, this past August 2025, they celebrated their 14-year anniversary trip. They have 3 adorable kids, Carter, Cruz, and Cameron. And this whole messy situation, of course, the kids are going to be seriously affected by this, and we'll talk about that later in the episode. We don't talk about the children. But Wendy and Cameron did this ad for this children's movie, and little Cameron was absolutely an amazing little actress. She was reading her lines like no other. Like, she was so impressive, this little girl. And I just want to say, I hope people and casting agents see past her parents and can spot her, can cast her for another future role, because she really was so freaking cute, and you could tell she was really excited and she memorized all her lines, and that's really impressive for such a young girl. So we love you, Cameron. Here, and I know you didn't ask, we're one of your biggest fans. So Eddie and Wendy are kind of cute, and she knows it. She even posted some pictures a couple months ago with some caption implying, Bonnie and Clyde vibes. And let us not forget the real Bonnie and Clyde were violent criminals. So, referring to themselves as that kind of has this dramatic, dangerous connotation. And, we kind of say that phrase colloquially in our speech, but in their situation, they might actually be a Bonnie and Clyde, where they're, just criminals, not violent criminals, but criminals nonetheless. One interesting thing to note about Wendy and Eddie's relationship is that their families actually aren't close. Eddie is completely cut off from his family. Wendy and Eddie's mom had some beef in the past, which ultimately made Eddie's mom not support Eddie and Wendy's marriage, which is really sad and really isolating. And Eddie has consistently reached out to his siblings to try to maintain a relationship with them, but the siblings are actually taking the mother's side, which is just kind of, par for the course for their culture, and, going against your parents could be considered incredibly disrespectful. So it is unfortunate that they have this strenuous relationship with his family. And I mean, we've all seen Wendy's mother on television. She's not exactly a bunch of roses. And it's not really surprising that she would have a problem with Eddie's mother rather than just, sucking it up and getting over it. They, will continue to beef for the foreseeable future. So let's get to the fun stuff, people. Let's rewind a bit back to April of 2024. Wendy and Eddie were on vacation in Jamaica, living, laughing, loving. Photos at the beach, mocktails, Mai Tais, whatever. And supposedly, during that vacation, their house was robbed of many designer handbags and jewelry. So the Osefo family is living in a gorgeous 5-bedroom colonial in Finksburg, Maryland. They've been living in this house since 2019. It's an incredibly high-end area, and burglaries of this kind are basically non-existent. So that was already kind of a red flag about this case. So Wendy and Eddie actually reported to their insurance companies that approximately 80 items of jewelry, luxury goods, clothing, and shoes were stolen from their house, worth a total of more than $450,000 personal property lost. So basically, one of the fishiest parts of all of this is that Eddie was clearly filing 2 separate insurance claims for the same items stolen. So that in itself is incredibly fraudulent. So the charges are mainly surrounding insurance fraud. Wendy faces a total of 16 charges of insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and a false statement to a police officer. Eddie faces actually 18, 2 more charges for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and false statements to a police officer. So this is all not good. So first and foremost, the 2 insurance claims was a red flag and obviously deeply incriminating that something is a little bit off. Then we need to talk about the burglary itself was suspect from the jump. So again, they are living in a very high-end town, Finksburg, Maryland, and all of their neighbors live in beautiful big mansions too. I, did a little Google Earth street view, walking around the neighborhood. Absolutely adore the vibes, but it's incredibly rare for a town like that to have burglaries. So Wendy and Eddie did have an ADT alarm system that they put on before they left. However, no motion was detected from the alarm system throughout the dates that they were claiming they had the burglary. So that's suspect. The couple also had a Ring camera on their front door that didn't catch any suspicious activity. However, it recorded package deliveries. So the Ring cam was ringing, and it wasn't ringing for any random people who were breaking into their house. If there were these robbers who were going to their house, they live in a very high-end area, which means that other people probably have Ring cameras themselves that might be able to access some footage to see if they actually saw a car peeling out after this, robbery of over $450,000 worth of items. So it's all really suspect. The burglary itself just isn't making sense. Then Tamara motherfucking Judge, always weaseling her way into every conversation, actually was talking about on her podcast how one of Wendy's neighbors actually reached out to Tamara to say, the whole neighborhood thought this was really suspect. And, you're in this high end neighborhood. There's not that many houses. Everybody has acres on acres. And, the neighbors are all up in your business. Neighbors themselves became very wary and nervous about a burglary happening in their, beautiful neighborhood. And, that does put a quote unquote stain on the reputation of the area where you're living, as well as could possibly affect property values because of, an increase in crime. So the neighbors took a real interest in this situation and really were questioning if this burglary was true. So the next kind of phase of incriminating nonsense is the property that was taken. So during this investigation, the detectives actually found that over $20,000 of the items reported stolen had actually been returned by the owners of the items, aka Wendy and Eddie, to the locations that they were purchased for full refunds. So they're purchasing a Louis Vuitton bag for $3,000. Let's go back. Let's harken back to our earlier example. We buy this bag for $3,000. We then say it's stolen for $3,000, then we return it for, the full refund of $3,000. So, the insurance is actually paying you $3,000 for something that you actually didn't ultimately buy and keep. So that's just fraud right there. And that's over $20,000. And furthermore, detectives actually found images of Wendy wearing some of the jewelry that had been reported stolen after the burglary actually took place. So that's really suspect. There's a V-shaped diamond ring that she's wearing in tons of photos. And how could you be so sloppy to think that people wouldn't catch on? Especially these investigators who are probably so grateful for these idiots who put their lives on social media and put their lives on reality television, because they can just go scroll the footage, scroll your page, scroll your stories, and possibly find some additional incriminating information. It's kind of obvious that they both clearly did this crime. So it's a thought process that Wendy and Eddie had where they said, but we're smarter than them, we'll get away with it. And you're not that fucking smart. You're not. Another issue, there was also another issue when it came to their wedding bands that they were both wearing on their vacation, as seen in the photos posted. And then those two rings that they were wearing were both written up on the two insurance claims as stolen items as well. So again, suspect. How could you be wearing a ring on the vacation that you're on, but then also it was stolen at the same time? It's just not adding up. And Wendy had a gold and diamond wedding band that they ended up getting over $25,000 for from the insurance claim. Again, something that she very much still has. And it's not looking good for Wendy and Eddie here. In Wendy's book, she really goes on and on and on and on and on about how important Nigerians' clothing and wardrobe is and how they look a certain way and how dressing well is kind of a badge of pride, which I absolutely agree with, especially, in the immigrant community. You're already judged before you open your mouth in this country. So anything you could do to make people think higher of you is something, the immigrant mindset will always take to. My mom is a daughter of immigrants, and, they had no money when they moved to America. And my mom grew up very, modestly, and her ethos was always, you get clothes from whatever Macy's, but you always make sure they're dry cleaned and clean and you have nice hair. Those things don't always cost a lot of money. You're going to be respected more if you show up looking nice, even if you're an immigrant, even if you're an idiot, even if whatever the situation is. It's kind of like, dressing for the life you want, not dressing for the job you want. So this again just kind of reinforces her desire to keep up with the Joneses, have the highest fashion, have the hottest clothing, have the best looks. Let's not forget that blue Michelin Man sweater dress she wore last year. I wonder if that's been, sent back and returned yet, because that was not good. That was a bad moment for Wendy. We've all been there, though, so I can't completely shit on her. So one of the last and most important incriminating details of this entire situation are the emails between Wendy and Eddie. This is more important than Hillary Clinton's emails. And the emails between the two of them laid out the specifics of the details that they were putting into the two insurance claims. Yikes. So there is a direct email where Eddie emails Wendy the following message: are there additional high value items we can add to this inventory list? I'm trying to get the total to exceed $423,000, which is our policy maximum. There you go. He's making up things to put onto this inventory list to reach the maximum amount of payout. So this email between the two of them is incredibly bad and incriminating. It confirms that they both knew what was happening and they both were complicit in this fraud. This is definitely a moment where Dorinda Medley and her wisdom is accurate. Write it, regret it, say it, forget it. That's, granted, she's a drunkard, so it's she literally didn't even form the memory and she just forgets everything. But in their situation, you don't put it on email. And again, this is a lawyer, all these freaking degrees, PhDs, this and that, and you didn't ever think maybe we should take our fraud offline. You live together, you're married, just go to the living room, say, babe, add more shit to the list. Putting in an email was a really, really foolish thing that Eddie did. So this duo was arrested Thursday, October 9th, which led to one of the most bone-chilling parts of this entire saga, which are their mugshots. And I do have this aversion to posting people's mugshots because I feel like, one, it's bad juju, because, being at a place where you're taking your mugshot is like kind of one of the worst moments of your life, or, maybe recent history. But I feel like I've been 15 minutes away from like 10 different mugshots. So I try not to harp on other people's mugshots because I've been privileged enough to behave poorly and get away with it. But no, it's true. So I try not to post them. I find it to be like just a little rude. And again, it's like rich coming from me because I'm like consistently rude, but I do draw the line somewhere. But, Wendy and Eddie have different vibes going on in their two mugshots. Wendy's face screams duper's delight. She has a big grin on. She's got a cute little hairpiece going, but she has got these eyes that do look like she's smoking a bit of Happy Eddie. Like, same, love that for you. But she's got a grinning smile. She's clearly cavalier. She's calm. And when you're smiling in your own mugshot, when you know you've done fraudulent acts, that is, as I mentioned, duper's delight. So that's this phrase that kind of describes how people look and behave when they are feeling the thrill and pleasure of thinking that they're successfully deceiving somebody and that they believe that they're getting away with it. And so this duper's delight face smirk that she has can honestly be linked to a sense of kind of superiority and maybe cleverness over, the people she's deceiving. At these moments in life, I feel like you got to eat some humble pie. You have to know he did do the damn thing. Well, speaking of Happy Eddie, his face looks like mine after a beach day where I've taken like 2 edibles and drank 4 beers. Like, he has like a kind of smile happening. His eyes are stoned like no other. He looks like he's really just chilling. He doesn't look as demonic as Wendy does. So on October 9th, the two of them were arrested and they were released the following day, the 10th, after placing a $50,000 bond each. Just a quick hundo K. And I do believe in innocent until proven guilty. Of course, that is the American way for some. But all signs are kind of pointing to them being guilty of this crime. And with these two being, lawyers, smart people in general, they're going to try to find a loophole, a way to get out of it. But it does seem like they're kind of caught. And the fact that these investigators had access to their Ring camera and their ADT footage, their emails, they clearly had access to so much information over the past year that the two of them must have been shaken in their boots knowing that this is likely going to come to light. So while the courts have been going through all of this evidence that they had mentioned that the couple had been burdened by substantial debt. And as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of that debt is likely from their student loans, which, they could have taken a little bit of time to not pay them throughout the pandemic, which I know that was very much a thing that people were taking advantage of. Why the fuck not? After those years of not paying your debt, you still have to come out and pay it. In addition to the luxury cars, in addition to the vacations, in addition to the probably fabulous private school those 3 beautiful kids go to, in addition to the kids' fancy clothing and her fancy clothing. And, the glam squad that she needs to hire for being on the show. And he started a business, Happy Eddie. Where do those startups costs come from? So they have all these financial burdens that they are needing to continue paying to keep up with the Joneses. So at a certain point, I guess you're like, fuck, well, you'd think with our 8 degrees, we would just like get a job, an honest job and work. But instead, let's be criminals. Let's think we're going to get away with something. Yeah, right. So the fallout is already starting to kind of happen for Wendy. I don't know what's going to happen to them in terms of prison or jail or whatever. Like, I don't really know that, and I'm not really going to get into that. But I will say we cannot forget or be blinded by the fact how the justice system takes to immigrants committing crimes. let's be real. They are Nigerian American citizens, but there is proof that there are jury biases towards immigrants who commit fraud in this country. So they're already in a vulnerable place as immigrants in this country. And that's just how the cookie crumbles, unfortunately, where we are. So I don't know what their legal outcome will be. And there's not really enough information online to really solidify any, course of action for their future. So the fallout is already happening for Wendy. She was currently teaching a course at Wesleyan University where she voluntarily stepped down from her teaching position. She submitted a letter of resignation prior to any public announcement made by the university. So she got ahead of it. She said, "You didn't fire me, I fired me. I did the bad thing, I fire me." Which, whatever, great. And she was teaching as a visiting professor of sociology, the sociology of TV, race, colorism, and xenophobia, which are, many of the arguments that she had with ladies on the show was about colorism and race on television. And she actually talks about this interesting tidbit in her book, again, 47% listened to the book, that she was talking about how so many of the shows that she watched growing up of Black families had a dark-skinned dad and a light-skinned mom, and how she never saw darker-skinned women on her television show, which kind of gave her the assumption that darker skinned girls don't find love and they don't have these great lives and families and all of that. And so I thought that was very interesting. Again, as a stupid white, I, never thought of that. So the more you know. Thanks, Wendy, for that information from your book. I probably will listen to it after this, but I probably actually won't because I'll be done with this episode and what the fuck's the point? But I'm dying for the syllabus for the sociology of TV, race, colorism, and xenophobia. I tried to find it. I tried to do a lot of digging, but I couldn't find anything. So we all know Wendy was also a teacher at Johns Hopkins in Maryland before she resigned in 2024. So even that, she's giving up great opportunities to start a candle line, start a YouTube channel that goes nowhere, and possibly get into business with Peter Thomas. And the fact that Peter Thomas didn't want to be in business with these two fools should kind of tell you everything. So it seems like she has been clouded a little bit by newfound fame that comes from being on a show like The Real Housewives of Potomac. So Wendy was also slated to be on Bravo's new season of Wife Swap, and they completely canned the episode already. And God knows the depiction of her family life was probably like this rich as fuck family, fancy schmancy. And Bravo said, "Let's cut that off as soon as possible," because they know the freaking eagle-eyed viewers of Bravo shows will be zooming into the background and being like, "Was that bag on the insurance claim?" They're going to be reaching out to Liberty Mutual to be adding more things to the suit against them. But that's obviously a huge blow. Happy Eddie, not sure what's going on there. Eddie did post a photo of himself in New York on his social media the other day. They were supposed to be in town for an event called Journey to Justice Gala. That was this past Wednesday, but it doesn't seem like they went to it. The event itself was canceled. But Eddie's in New York, which again is a little bit suspect because he's crossing state lines as, somebody who's going to be convicted of convicted of a crime. So I don't know what that means. Again, would love to be a lawyer and could actually give proper information. I'm I don't know what that means. So good luck. Thanks for listening to my podcast. We can talk about Eddie being possibly disbarred. Let's not forget Frank Catania had a kind of similar situation where he was ultimately disbarred and can no longer practice law. And you guys, I don't mean to bring up the kids because you're not supposed to do that, but I am gonna do it because, we can't forget about them as a shrapnel to their parents' poor behavior, and this is going to make a huge dent on their lives. Unfortunately, it's one thing to have parents who are scam artists, in your local town, but it's another thing when the whole world is kind of talking about it. I mean, not the whole world. That's that's generous considering who we're talking about, but podcasters are talking about it. I'm obviously doing hours of research about this, so this is going to impact them. And so that's really, really sad. And I also think this leads into Wendy's situation with her mother. Where is her relationship with her mom going to lie? Because her mom was a single mom. She gave up everything to provide for Wendy and her sister. The ambition and expectations of her Nigerian mother to be this person, to get all these things, to have all of these things, ultimately led her to feeling so bad about her situation that she needed to commit crimes to get back to a place where society will think she's wealthy, her mom will be proud of her, and all of these things. So it's really sad. And, unfortunately, again, these two think that they are like, really wheeling and dealing and fucking killing it. But, if you think you can outsmart insurance or the police or investigators, like, you can't forget that, that will catch up to you in some way. And it's very clearly catching up to them now. And, we'll see now where Wendy kind of fits into Potomac. She's not going to be going on Watch What Happens Live, that's for sure, to promote this latest season. Their representative did come out with a statement on October 10th saying they are grateful for the outpouring of concern and support from friends, fans, and colleagues. The Osefos, along with their legal team, look forward to their day in court. At this time, they respectfully ask for privacy as they focus on their family and the legal process ahead. Dr. Wendy Osefo and her husband, Edward Osefo, are back home safely with their family and in good spirits. This is a really great time for them to own a weed company. I would just be stoned out of my gourd if this were me. It's like, let me just like get high and forget. And then hopefully like 6 months passes and like you don't go to jail and you're just like still high on the couch. Again, granted, I like don't have children to protect and take care of. So like I can do that. But that's, a perk of being in the marijuana industry, I guess. But it is, again, so sad to see somebody like Wendy who had everything going for her. She was beautiful, intelligent, elegant, and poised, and smart, and becoming famous. And so it's really sad that even she, somebody who has it all going for her, fell victim to thinking that scamming and fraudulent behavior would be the best route for her. And it's so sad when somebody like her, who has so many money-making opportunities, whether it's teaching, being a talking head, being on the Real Housewives of Potomac, whatever she wanted to do, she could do. But instead, she wanted to create candles and scam people instead of doing an honest day's work, which is really fucking sad. And sometimes these forever students, these people who just go to school, I'm so smart, they can't even fucking work. These forever students don't know how to actually get to work and get money. And then once you get the money, how do you keep the money? So being so smart and educated and having all these accolades and whatnot is impressive in one way, but taking those accolades and turning it into a successful career, and then turning that successful career into, stable wealth for your family and generations to follow, that's the hard part. And you can do that by being by going to a vocational school and saying fuck college and becoming a plumber and becoming, the richest guy in your town, because everybody's trying to have a fancy, flashy job instead of being a plumber. So, these plumbers are going to be making a shit ton of money in, 10 years when they realize, fuck, young kids want to be YouTubers and not plumb or like do any kind of more blue collar jobs. I think this became so interesting and fascinating because I think viewers would never expect this from Wendy. But what the fuck do we know about these people? Well, I don't know Wendy. You don't know Wendy. Who the fuck is Wendy? We don't know. So it's interesting to watch this play out, and I'm so excited to see how this is going to play out on the Real Housewives of Potomac this season. As we know, Karen got out of jail 6 months earlier or so a part of me thinks that they were already planning on picking up cameras when she got back home and, capturing some of her Karen Comes Home special, whatever we want to call it. But now I'm wondering if they need to rejigger things a little bit in the edit of this season to position Wendy in a different way so that they can address this on the show, possibly on this season. If they were smart, they would do it this season. Speaking of, oh my gosh, the reunion this season, it's going to be Wendy saying, sorry, Andy, I don't have a lawyer here. I can't talk about it. Sorry, Andy, I don't have my lawyer here. What about your husband? He's a lawyer. Your lawyer's right there, babe. So thank you so much for listening to I Know You Didn't Ask. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun researching it, and I'll continue doing these kind of fun, scammy little deep dives because it's just fascinating. And, it's just a reminder to live within your means. You have everything you need. As long as you're healthy and happy and have people who love you in your life, then that's what you should be focusing on, not finding a way to scam an insurance company so that you can get more money to buy more hideous blue Michelin Man dresses. So thank you so much for listening again. Catch me on YouTube, catch me on Instagram as well at Megan the Podcaster, as well on TikTok, Megan the Podcaster, where you can see short clips of the show. Again, YouTube is where you can find the full Monty versions of every episode of this show moving forward. So Mondays, you'll have I Know You Didn't Ask. Wednesday will be a question mark bonus episode if I can pump one out. Again, I have to get a job, people. I know, sensitive subject. But Fridays will always be Freaky Friday, which will be about whatever I want to talk about that freaky week. So thank you again for listening. I so appreciate it. It's so exciting to have so many people listen, and I'm so excited to start making more video content and just kind of having fun on YouTube. So, oh yeah, just also like I look really cute today. So you should all go to YouTube and compliment how I look because that's what I care about. Wendy cares about, degrees and scamming. I care about looking cute and possibly fixing my bottom teeth in the near future. Okay, thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.